Alrighty, the first thing that we need to do when we're going to make apple cake is get some apples. And I just happen to have two beautiful apple trees in my yard. They are Honeycrisp trees, and these apples are gorgeous. So take a peek at those beautiful apples. And I'm going to pick a basket full here, and then we'll get going with our recipe. Good morning, it's time for another edition of Bacon in Your Jammies. Today we're going to be making an apple cake. Fall is fastly upon us. It smells like fall outside today here in Cuyuna Country, and apple cake is what's on the menu. So this apple cake is adapted from a recipe that I found from Smitten Kitchen, and it's her mom's apple cake, and it's really, really good. It's a really dense cake that is like a pound cake with a layer of big apples in the middle and then apples on top of it. The recipe calls for 6 apples, and I am lucky enough to have 2 beautiful Honeycrisp apple trees in my backyard that are filled with beautiful apples. And it looks like it's a bumper crop of apples as I drive through my neighborhood. The apple trees are really, really full. And it's time to pick. It's time to start picking. We have not had a frost here, and that I think is kind of an old wives' tale that apples are better once you've had a hard frost. But it's been cold, and these apples are delicious. Now, you can use any apples that you want. I like to use the Honeycrisp. The original recipe called for Macintosh because that's what her mom used, but you could use any firm, good apple. And it calls for 6 apples. Now, I used apples of this size. Okay, so I would call that a medium apple. If you're using, you can get Honeycrisp apples at the store that are about twice this size. I would guess that I have about 6 cups of apples. I didn't measure them, but look at this gorgeous bowl of apples. Now, I prepared my apples by using my apple slicer corer. It happens to be a Pampered Chef one. Cutting them, slicing them down, and then just using a knife and chopping them into about a 1/2 inch squares. So they don't have to all be perfect, but you want them big. And remember, that's kind of how I like my food. I like to be able to see what it is when we put it into our good stuff. So I have apples. I'll go through the list of characters or the cast of ingredients here. So we have apples, cinnamon, sugar, flour, baking powder, salt, oil, orange juice, a 1/4 cup of orange juice, and then vanilla and eggs. So it's a really simple, basic ingredient recipe, except for, I guess, the orange juice would be the outlier there. So the pan that we're going to use for this, I'm going to use my cheesecake pan. Now, the original recipe calls for a bundt pan. But the first time I made it, I was not at home and didn't have a bundt pan, so I used a cheesecake pan, and I loved it in this cheesecake pan. So feel free to use whatever you'd like. You could use an Angel Food cake pan, but this is a 9-inch. I think this is a 9-inch. Maybe it's a 10-inch. I bet this is 10-inch. You need a big, substantial size pan because it's going to be full. So you can't use a regular cake pan. Alrighty, so, and I have that just prepped with, I've just sprayed it with my cooking spray. Now, I've got my apples, and we are going to put in here a teaspoon of cinnamon and 5 tablespoons of sugar. So, cinnamon and sugar, just sprinkle that over the apples, and just give that a quick stir, and then set that aside. So that's just gonna coat those apples, and it's gonna start to make a little bit of juice in there. And nothing better than smelling good cinnamon and apples. Yummy, yummy. So my guess is that in the upcoming editions of Bacon in Your Jammies, we're going to do quite a few apple things because it is definitely apple season. Alrighty, so there's my apples. I've got those prepped. We're going to just set that aside. Then we're going to prepare our dry ingredients. So our dry ingredients are 2 3/4 cup flour, a tablespoon of baking powder, a teaspoon of salt, and I already had mixed that in with my baking powder, and we're going to just whisk this together. So that's our dry ingredients. So again, 2 3/4 cup flour, a teaspoon of salt, and a tablespoon of baking powder. Okay, so that's our dry ingredients. And then we're gonna do our wet ingredients. Whoop. I had my camera on a lazy Susan and it got lazy, I guess. Alrighty, and then our wet ingredients are a cup of oil, and I use canola. You can use whatever, hold on, cup of oil. Whatever oil you want. You could even use melted butter if you wanted to, but I've always used oil when I've made this. So I have a cup of oil and a 1/4 cup of orange juice, and that's prepared orange juice. Three teaspoons of vanilla. 1, 2, 3. And 4 eggs. And I'm going to whisk that together, and then I'm going to add in my sugar. So I'm just going to give this a quick whisk. Who needs an apron? All right, just a quick whisk together there. And then we're going to add in 2 cups of sugar. So again, this cake is kind of like a pound cake. It's very dense. Now this recipe is really good, you know, once it's cooled and out of the oven, but it's even better the next day. And store this at room temperature. Don't put it in the refrigerator. Store it at room temp, and it will just get more and more moist in the next couple of days, but certainly suitable for eating today. All right, so now we've got our, just gonna double check here. We've got our cup of oil, 2 cups of sugar, 1/4 cup of orange juice, 3 teaspoons of vanilla, and 4 eggs. Okay, so that's our wet ingredients. And now we're gonna put the wet into the dry. Or should we put the dry into the wet? Add wet ingredients into the dry, this is what it says. Okay. So, I don't think it matters. We're going to start to just mix this in. You don't need to overbeat this. I'm not using my mixer today, just doing this all by hand. Alrighty. Now, this is going to bake for 90 minutes. I don't know that I've ever made a cake that baked for so long, but it is dense and it's big, and it takes 90 minutes to get through and get that nice and totally cooked. So start watching it, you know, you'll start to smell it. It'll smell like it's done, and use a cake tester. Now remember, you're going to be going through apples and a couple of layers of dough. So you want to get down into the top part of the dough when you're checking it to make sure that it's done, because you want it to be cooked. Because you don't want to be testing an apple. Okay. Now, we're going to put half of this batter into our prepared cake pan, and then we layer it with half of the apples. Just make sure we've got this all mixed and away from the sides here. You could certainly use your mixer if you wanted for this, but it's easy enough to do without. So half of the batter goes in the cake pan, and then you layer it with half the apples, then the rest of the batter, and then the rest of the apples on top of that. Okay, just till it's all incorporated. Take your pan here and put about half of it in. And add half of our yummy apples. Whoop, I hit a pocket of flour there. Okay. The rest of our good batter, get every drop of it. And then we put the apples on top. So we're just going to spread that. And some of the apples from the bottom layer do come up, and that's okay. I just want to try and get that all covered with some good batter. And then the rest of the apples on top. Okay, and the apples, and put all the juices in there too that have come from that good cinnamon and sugar. Okay, there's our apple cake ready to go into the oven, 90 minutes at 350, and then you're gonna take it out and let it cool completely before you take it out of the pan. Now, in a cheesecake pan, that's easy to do because you're just gonna open up your pan and then take it out and put it on your serving plate. But in a bundt pan too, make sure that you've got it totally cooled, and then take your knife around the edges if you need to. So we'll come back with our finished product. Okay, it's time to finish up. Here is my cake. I have just taken the outside ring of my cheesecake pan off, and it is looking beautifully. I did bake mine for about 95 minutes, just till it was really set, and my cake tester came out clean. So now I have let it cool, and I am going to put it on my serving plate. I'm gonna just lift this up, just loosen it up here all the way around. And if you need to use a spatula to help you do that, that's what you might need to do. Oop, I feel a little bit of something stuck there. Okay, so I've got it off of my pan. I'm going to put it here on my footed cake plate that I've chosen. And oh, it's going to be pretty. All right, now just as a final garnish for this, I'm just going to dust it with a little bit of powdered sugar. Now you don't have to do this, you can leave it plain, but I'm just going to put a little bit here in my sifter, and then just bump that on there until it gets just a little bit of a dusting. Just adds a little bit of sweetness there. It makes it really, really pretty. Okay, there you have it. There's our apple cake. Enjoy.